Welcome to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. 3 analytics pros and the occasional guest discussing digital analytics issues of the day. Find them on Facebook at facebook.com/analytics hour. And now, the Digital Analytics Power Hour.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 17. As we start the show, I have a question. Do you struggle to get respect? Are you afraid of being called on to present in a meeting? Are your charts and graphs a laughingstock? Well, fear not, intrepid analyst. This episode, we're going to teach you how to be the data viz whiz that you've always wanted to be. And to help us, we've got a special guest. I'm also joined by Tim Wilson from Web Analytics Demystified and Jim Kane, who is knocking them down at Napkin and Babbage Systems.
Is he the chief whiz, data viz whiz, wizard?
I'm too busy knocking him down to respond to that, Tim.
Okay.
And I'm Michael Helbling. I lead the analytics practice at Search Discovery. All right. So our guest, we're very excited, is Lea Pica, who everyone knows in the measure/analytics community is a tour de force when it comes to not only data visualization, but also how to present that effectively. She actually leads people on this journey to becoming better at that. She's presented hundreds of times across all kinds of conferences and meetings, and she's really taken a deep dive into this space. And you can actually find more about her at her website, leapica.com. And she's actually also starting her own podcast soon, which we're very excited about. So welcome, Lea.
Top of the morning.
Great. Let's get started. And first, let's talk about why do people struggle in this area, and why do analysts have such a hard time with this aspect of being a great analyst? And I'll throw that out to everybody, but
mainly to Lea.
Since you're our guest, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I think it's all about being equipped when you start. When I think about how I started in this industry, which I sort of fell into it by accident, like I think a lot of practitioners did, no one sat me down and told me, hey, you're going to have to go in this conference room in front of these scary people who are very important, and you're going to have to make them care about your data and you and what you have to say. And that's going to require things like understanding storytelling and how to break down technical jargon for lay people and how to design data and not create slides that look like vomit and how to be an inspiring motivational speaker. You know, these are all elements that go into that. No one teaches you this stuff when you become an analyst. So I think it's just a lack of equipping the early, your early career in the front lines. So that's my perspective.
It seems like it's because a lot of analysts sort of stumble into it or drawn to the data, and the people who want them to do stuff are looking for people who can crunch the data. Like it's almost a blind spot, because I don't even think the people who are hiring analysts realize how important that is, right? They're looking for somebody who has data crunching skills. That's the thing that's the big mystery to them, is the data. They don't say, we need somebody who can understand the tools, pull the data, crunch the numbers, and communicate effectively, because the communicate effectively seems like this soft skill that tons of people who really, that's the core part of their job, and they do a shitty job of it. So it's kind of echoing what you're saying, that it's not even really often recognized by the people who are hiring or managing. And therefore, to expect somebody who is moving into that space, nobody is saying, go do this. You need to do this. It matters. Do it well. And so it's pretty easy to just ignore it and not realize that there's this massive gap in what you're doing as your job, that you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
Is this a have to have or a nice to have? Like, would I hire someone with amazing presentation skills for anything? Like for my CFO, for, our operations person? Is this just anybody should learn these skills to be better? And I'm not belittling it. It's just, is this a more important skill set for a data analyst than it is for, a salesperson, a financial controller, email marketing manager?
Well, I think it's the perspective of the analyst. A lot of this is tying into people that want more from their careers. Those are the people that I'm looking to help. I know there are analysts that just want to crunch numbers and they're comfortable with that and they find a place that works for them. And that's totally fine. It's absolutely acceptable. But I'm looking to help people that do want more from those careers. And I can say for me personally, and I don't know if you agree, that every major leap forward I've taken in my career has been in some part due to a presentation or a series of presentations that I did where I became more visible in my organization.
No, I think you make an interesting point, Leah. That is, and to your point earlier, Jim, that's right. Like, that's probably not the primary skill that you put on the job description. But at the same time, probably every analytics job description you will see has something about an effective communicator or, good written and presentation skills or ability with those skills. It's not usually worded in a way that would actually say, hey, we're going to measure that as we bring you in and talk about your capabilities. But we also pick up cues from people in the interview process. And if somebody just can't even talk through what they're good at, that hurts them in the interview process, even that. So having that confidence and, I think I learned as an analyst, you're always selling. When you present an idea, you're pitching that idea. You want people to buy into your idea. And that's when it became obvious to me. It's like, oh, I really need to think about how I do that. What's the right way to do that? If you're not ever the guy or girl who is presenting the data, you're just crunching the numbers and then your boss takes the data and presents it. I think you'll get frustrated with that job in a different way, because you're not able to see the impact of your work. And I think that's what's really important. And so I don't know that every single person needs to make this their top priority, but I think it's worth everybody's attention. And even when you're not speaking in a presentation setting, your data is speaking when you hand it out to people. And that's something every analyst is doing.
So Jim said presentation, and I would go with communication rather than presentation, and presentation is one form of that. But to the different roles, and I just started kind of jotting them down, I think it is different. And I was the guy an episode or two ago that I think every profession thinks they're special. But if you look at somebody coming in as a junior or mid-level accountant, right, they're working a lot with other accountants. They're already speaking the same language, right? They've got balance sheets, financial statements, double entry accounting, whatever kind of accounting they're doing. It doesn't mean that effective communication and presentation isn't going to hold them in good stead, but a lot of what they're doing to turn their work product over is into somebody else who speaks a similar language. Say the same thing for marketers. If you've been trained in marketing, you know what to talk, personas, and creative and messaging and the 4 Ps and all this stuff. So, and a lot of the people you're interacting with are doing the same thing. Same thing for IT. If you're a front-end developer or a back-end developer, a lot of what you're producing is code that works or it doesn't, and there's some level of saying, did you do it correctly? Where I think analysts, more often than not, we're not trying to deliver and effectively communicate with other analysts. In order to actually have an impact, we have to effectively communicate with somebody who's not an analyst. And I may be oversimplifying or trying to pretend that everybody else gets to operate in a silo and analysts, have to kind of cross over to another world. But I think that's, to me, there is that distinction. It's really hard to be successful if you can't take this thing that you're passionate about and you have to kind of translate it into something where somebody who's not passionate about the data and the spreadsheets, and they can still understand it and do something with it.
So I think we all agree. Right?
Can we have the long version, please?
Settle.
Sorry.
I think we're all in agreement that it's probably a good skill to have. So that's good. So that'll really help set us up.
No, I
for the
have
rest.
one more thing to
Otherwise,
say about
this
that.
this would be a really short show. We're like, well, we pretty much disagree on this, so join us next week.
So I don't even disagree. I mean, I'm a huge fan of talking about communication and communication skills. It's just, I was just wondering, is this a universal, employees in 2015 need to be good storytellers if they want to grow in their career? Is that a big part of it? And secondly, is if it is more applicable to analysts, which parts of communication are more important? I'm just trying to go in that direction because I know some very, very talented introverted analysts who can tell a great story with a keyboard and have no interest in telling a story in the boardroom. So I get all the credit, which is fantastic.
and I think it doesn't stack up the same for every person. I think you bring up a good point, Jim, which is not everybody wants or desires to be front and center. In fact, some people would rather play a supporting role. Frankly, it's a ton of work to get all that stuff together. So I'm really happy if somebody else wants to do it.
But still, there's the danger of, I don't want to do any of that, so I'm just going to send you the ANOVA table. And I'm going to be like, I don't want to, somebody else will have to turn that into a story, right? I mean, that distinction between, there's data visualization, which is, I think, a core, absolute, must-have, inarguable. If you're putting 3D pie charts out, like, you should just be taken off the woodshed. I don't care, how brilliant of a data scientist you are. You're not brilliant if you're just shooting yourself in the foot like that. I think that's probably a must-have. It's learnable and it's teachable and it's trainable. The getting to being front and center and delivering it from a presentation and communication, I think maybe is an area that is not necessarily everybody has to get there.
You see, and I think someone could deliver an effective presentation with exploding pie charts and Comic Sans.
Well, it's been fun. It's been fun doing this podcast.
I definitely didn't hear that.
We made it. It was a good run. 16 and a half episodes was...
I'm going to wrap it up
nice.
then with 3 words. Wing frickin' dings. That's the font. That's what time it is right there.
We've all built a conversion funnel with wingding characters in Excel. No, but I think even if you're not a big presenter of data, there's still the passion that you have for the data. Like, one of my favorite TED Talks of all time, and everybody who's an analyst has probably seen it. Hans Rosling's presentation. And that guy's obviously a nerd. And he is so in love with what he's seeing and so wants to communicate. You're swept away by his passion, even if he's not necessarily following, like, the uber awesome best practices for how to deliver the best possible speech. He's actually very effective because he's very passionate about what he's talking about.
Sometimes the most passionate people, without the right tools for bringing that person out, can shrink into a shell of themselves when they're put in front of these people. It's like they're being put in front of a firing squad, and suddenly they retreat, and it's like you don't even recognize this person. I've seen this happen so many times with my colleagues in my various companies. And, while that guy may not be Gar Reynolds, he had practice. He prepared that. There were tools he used to exude that passion and that confidence. So,
but he also has an amazing data visualization, right? I mean, that was like literally moving bubble charts is not something you're just stumbling across. Like, his entire presentation was a brilliant data visualization that he was passionate about. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but that's what
you did.
What I do.
Yeah, and now available as part of Google Charts.
I actually went and tried to build those in the before he had just gotten hired there. I tried to kind of recreate it and learned once again my limited technical skills. That was 6 or 7 years ago.
Tim did fail to do that, but I did not. So
nailed it.
So nice.
Tim and I have talked about that.
I couldn't develop a flu symptom. I mean, you guys are way ahead of me. So you said earlier, Tim, some people just give the data table and then something about pie charts and then do it properly. And I think we can all agree that a good piece of analysis is never just the data table. A good piece of analysis is a strongly thought out point of view. I mean, you're Johnny Hypothesis. I mean, you know how to formulate a well-structured piece of work. So what we're talking about, and maybe I'm missing the point, is to take a really good piece of work and ensure that that good piece of work is noticed and taken advantage of in the organization by presenting it appropriately. Is that fair?
I think so. We talk about the narrative and storytelling, and just before we hopped on to record, I was looking at a new client's, some of their existing reports that they're producing, and I realized how often I go in, even for a recurring report, how little care. Like, if you're producing just the weekly e-commerce report, it just seems so common to see this big grid of numbers. And without any attempt to say, I can't provide a grid of numbers. I don't know what this is going to say. It's automated, or I have to lightly touch it, so I'm not doing a full-on presentation. but I've got to kind of put something in there so the eye is going to be drawn to something that will be interesting. And that's
hello, conditional formatting. No, I'm just kidding.
That's conditional formatting. That's font sizes. It's layout. It's what do you chart? What do you not?
But there's something else there, because, I mean, we can talk badly about data tables all day, but actually that's sometimes the best way to present something, because that's the way that people consume it.
No. Anybody who gets a data table, they are copying. Before they can do dick with it, they are having to go and chart it. Like, you cannot consume a big data table.
I'm sorry, dude. That is not true in everyday life. I'm with you. Like, if I get a table, like, the first thing I do is drop some trends on it so I can see what's happening. Not everybody's like that, though.
I have been told that so many flipping times. And then every time I've gone in and said, well, gee, what if we looked at it this way instead? They're like, oh, my God, I can finally understand it. I've heard the bullshit excuse of the analyst saying, that's how my boss likes to see it. They're all about the numbers. They want to see the big table. And it's like, no, because you had some totally false premise discussion with them where they gave you a list of metrics they wanted, and they wanted them by month or by week. So you produced it and showed it to them and said, is this what you want? And they said, yes. And you're like, well, that's how my boss wants it, because your boss didn't know any better. So you can't. Like, tables are good for when I need to look up a row and a column and pick out one number so I can actually, triangulate on something as a lookup. The human brain can't process. It's a fact. Like, you cannot, it's whatever, 7 to 9 chunks of information. If you have 150 equally weighted, which is only a 10 by 5, 10 by 15, somebody check my math, 10 by 15 table of data, like, you have to labor too hard at that.
So I think there's a really vicious cycle happening between analyst and marketer or stakeholder. And that is, you do whatever your stakeholder wants, but they're not equipped with knowledge of how the human brain processes information. And then the analyst produces exactly what they want, despite maybe their instincts. And the stakeholder continues to not understand what's happening. So while I kind of agree actually with Mike, where there are cases and there are people where a data table suits them, if it's accompanied with other forms of more visual aspects, I think it has their place. But I think for the most part, an analyst will really set themselves apart and give themselves an edge if they learn those principles and start to help break that cycle with their stakeholders and start showing that they're a subject matter expert in this area. That's the biggest complaint that I get from my audience is, my clients don't get it. This is what they want. I can't convince them. And, let's all think of ways we can do that, break that chain.
But I think if you don't give them and I don't know if Michael, if you've got kind of an anecdote in mind to say it, I feel like when I've had the opportunity to say, let me show you a different way and you can decide.
Well,
I've never run into that.
We're not all Tim Wilson,
Right.
When Tim speaks, people listen,
No,
so,
no.
It's different for the rest of us. Where
on the earth.
No,
Yeah.
I mean,
Like,
in some cases I have to build up a year of producing the same shit until they trust me that I know what I'm talking about to say, okay, we'll give you a little leeway to go try something different. And then they say, yeah, that's great. I think it's when you're saying, do you like this? And if they say, yeah, because they know nothing different. And if you say, can I make it more graphical? They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. They have to see it.
Yeah, and I've already expressed my preference for sure. But it really comes back to, not every analyst at every point in time has the ability to kind of even start that conversation. They're part of a moving business, right? And that business meets on Mondays and they review the numbers, and by gum, they better be in this weird table that we've been using for the last 5 years.
Well, except that's, I would give the trick I've tried there is you look at no report stays totally static. So I've done the kind of rebuild the plane in flight by saying, you know what? I'm not going to take away what you said you want. I'm going to also give you that same information and just a piece of it. And this is, even if this, you don't have to give me, 3 months to go away. If I'm inside a company and I've got technically no incremental time to do anything on that report, I don't have to get permission to say, you know what? I'm going to put a second tab on here where I've just visualized the same information slightly differently.
Because a good dashboard can have multiple tabs, right?
Oh,
All right. So
I think
changing
that's a
gears
valid
here.
point.
Let's stop. Let's
Wait.
stop and regroup. Because what I actually want this show to actually focus on some productive ideas as opposed to
My correct one?
some of our
Sorry.
semantical, historical challenges.
I thought I was just giving a productive idea, but I realized we were heading.
I think you were beating a productive idea like into the dirt.
Can
Like,
I ask a question?
no, we're on to the productive idea. What's your
Yeah.
question? Just ask.
So we talked about presentations, and we're talking about dashboards and standardized reports. Could we make a quick list just so I can wrap my head around it of the various key things that an analyst has to communicate on? I mean, we got emails, we got phone calls, we have formal presentations. Like, is that something that you guys think about? I tend to mash them
I
up.
do.
So this is interesting to me.
When you guys present, do you wear your lucky shirt? Because I know I do.
I put pants on usually.
Well, that's
Does that
sort
count?
of that's like optional if you're telecommuting.
that's true. That's true.
So I would probably rather focus on discussing the analysis where you have to some degree control over, is it a phone call, is it an email, is it a presentation, but it is more of the one-time narrative presenting results than the standardized reports. I think I definitely took us off on that.
I love
Tangent.
it. And so let's dive right into that. What are some things that everybody does wrong but are easy to fix when presenting results? Let's put one right down the middle for you, Leah.
Okay.
We've got a PowerPoint. We're walking into a conference room. There's going to be some executive types in there. Most of them will have their phones ready to go the second we stumble.
Yep.
So that's what's going to happen. What should we start to do to prepare for this situation, and what are some stumbling blocks to avoid?
Okay. So if you're walking in and they're already in there with their phones, you're too late. If you have the opportunity to go early, do it. Do it as soon as you see the room is open. Get all your technical logistics nailed down. If it's a WebEx, sign in early, test your sound, and accept that inevitably something will go horribly wrong. I've never seen a perfect run like that, but getting closer. And I think the biggest thing is starting off strong. Sometimes people start off the meeting and they start talking like this and they sound like the guy from Office Space who really wanted his stapler back. You know, if you start strong, clear, strong, confident, friendly, approachable voice, maybe a smile, and stating the objective of the meeting. Why are you all there? You know, how often do we see a real objective and agenda in a meeting invite? I frequently don't see one. So starting that off really strong is important. And talking about your key findings and your recommendation, I like to put that up front sometimes so it's really clear how you're setting the stage. So those are some things I would try.
So since you already rounded the park on that one, throw out another soft one. Say it's an hour-long meeting. Is it, if you were going to rehearse for a full hour, that would be, if you wanted to do 2 run-throughs, now you've put 2 hours after you're technically ready? Where do you stand on the rehearsing front?
It depends on the, amount of time that you have, obviously, but I like to go through, just talk through the presentation at least 2 to 3 times before. People often feel they don't have enough time for that. And I say that when something's important enough to you, you will make the time. Have lunch at your desk and take 15, 20 minutes and just talk through it. That exercise can sometimes help you feel so much more comfortable in your skin. That's why people on Broadway rehearse, because that's how they internalize the information.
Yeah, I definitely practice. If it's an important presentation, we'll actually practice it multiple times before giving it, sometimes in front of the mirror, which is disconcerting. And you'll find yourself like getting stopped again and again as you find spots where you have to buff out edges. And that's really good, because if you do that in practice, you won't make those same mistakes when you actually kind of step up and do that. I would say that's more the exception than the rule, right? It's not every presentation is sort of like for your life, but the big ones definitely deserve that kind of commitment.
Well, I think, it's sometimes it's the first impression. So and maybe that's in the consulting world and some of the nature of some of my clients, it's the first time meeting with somebody is when I'm presenting something to them, or maybe it's the second time I've presented, and those, to take, maybe it is a 45-minute meeting, but I can do a run through in 15 minutes. I can run through the meat out loud, talking through it. I've also been known to be, as well as call in somebody else. And again, it's probably for the bigger ones to say, let me run through this with you, because I want to have somebody who's not as deep in it as I am to talk to it and say, does that make sense?
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, again, I think it comes down to what do you want out of that presentation as a career move. That I guess that's how I see these opportunities, not as things to just suffer through, but as real opportunities for you. And if you take those few minutes, even if it's a small internal meeting, and just talk through your thoughts even once or twice, I think you're going to see huge strides in that. That's my personal belief.
Do you guys often have stakeholder meetings where you're formally presenting and you're not allowed to have any kind of dialogue?
No.
Even if there is dialogue, I want to have a plan for how I want the meeting to go and the key things I want to communicate. And I usually expect there to be dialogue because that's my style. Like, I like engaging people, but I usually still want there to be key points or objectives like that I have in my mind.
But I've normally got a rough plan, but I've never practiced a client-facing presentation ever. I've done the debrief with the team, and I've got I know my stuff going in. And I know the things I want to accomplish, but I'm really focused on, and I'm not saying anyone's right. I'm finding this very interesting, but
I think some people, Jim, are preternaturally just amazing. It's just gifted.
I revel in my mediocrity.
Well, but you're coming from, interesting. Coming from, we've talked about this before, coming from kind of a sales background where if you've got the sales gene from a wired to one, actually be listening, which we haven't really said that, but to the dialogue point. And if I go into an hour-long meeting, I'm really aiming for maybe 15 minutes of formal content. I tend to think an hour is too long to sustain anybody's attention. So it's got to be, punchy and clear and delivered. And even if it's in, segments and modules, because you've got to be listening. But so I think, Jim, in your case, I think there's a level of where you have a little bit of a leg up in that you're coming from a place where you were having to have a good narrative and listen effectively and, probably do wing it better than many analysts.
Yeah, and again, that wasn't to kind of say I don't need to practice. It's just maybe it's because I do have those 10,000 hours Malcolm Gladwell style of just running 1 hour meetings before I even started to do analysis. But for me, the emphasis is really more on us and not me when I'm going into a session like that. I'm really trying to derive what I call, eureka moments where someone goes, oh, shit, got it, wow. I'm really pushing for those, right?
Which is a good point. If you get them engaged, if you have them engaged from the dialogue, once they're talking, as long as they're not just off because they can't understand your data, that's the worst. They're flipping ahead 3 slides and coming back and saying these numbers don't reconcile. That's a disaster, and you've done many, many, many things wrong. But if they're actually saying, what about this? What about that? Once you've got it to a dialogue, you have them engaged, right? They can't be in a dialogue and checking their phone at the same time.
Well, and Leah, you said this earlier, and maybe to you it's like a duh thing, but telling people to have an agenda for a meeting is one of those, almost no one does it.
Yeah.
And it's something that drives me, I'm going to sound like Tim, you know what makes me want to go behind the woodshed with a sack full of hammers and kill a crow? I'll tell you, it's when people don't have an agenda for a meeting. And it's 95% of my meetings. And then you have a whole bunch of smart people in the room with high salaries. You know what that meeting cost?
Yeah.
Well,
luckily, I have an agenda for this podcast, so let's keep moving.
Well, but I've got to wait. If you have an agenda, the agenda has to actually make sense. Because I look at agendas where I'm like, did anybody actually look at it and say, this is going to be the dullest meeting? If you put an agenda up and say, we're going to walk through the results from 2014 and we're going to do this, so I think the agenda is actually a good tool to say, if I've only got 3 points on my agenda, but they're really high impact, that actually makes sense. We're going to do X, then Y, and then Z. Because there are times where the agenda is saved from the last meeting's agenda, and it's anodyne and it's not that helpful. So I actually see an agenda as a way to say, yeah, what am I really doing here? It's not I need an agenda, check it off the box. It's what are we really trying to get done here?
Yeah,
But
I think
good
that
agenda,
could be a show in and of itself right there, how to set a good meeting objective.
But it's like a movie trailer, man. Like when someone's setting up a good meeting and I'm like, key things that make sense, this many minutes per thing. Oh, I really want to talk about, like, I'm stoked to go in.
How about a title that actually tells you what the meeting's about? I mean, I've just been overrun with meeting invites that say, meeting about this campaign. Well, so who cares? Like,
yeah, let's all meet about something.
Yeah, because I don't have enough going on.
So
I
okay, so
never
there's
thought
another
about agenda
thing.
as communication. Sorry, but I just really like this point because I mean, I've seen some of the things that Lea does, and I could never get that good at doing those things. No, seriously, like some of the presentation stuff is really badass.
I thought you meant the juggling kittens, because that's kind of impressive too.
Yeah, well,
Declawed kittens only.
Yeah.
so now she's giving away her secrets. All right, so
But I'm sitting in on the podcast. You didn't let me finish. So I'm sitting in on the podcast, and I'm looking at Leah's website, and I'm like, man, that looks really hard. And maybe the big takeaway for me would be, hey, man, I could write a really good agenda for my next meeting. And that's like one of those immediate career win moments, right? To just be someone who has their shit together on a meeting.
Yeah.
They're rare people. Okay,
Yeah.
Michael, sorry.
That's good. All right, so really quickly, because we're actually running short on time, another thing that happens all too often in meetings, especially in digital analytics, is that somebody is for sure that they know digital analytics way better than you, oh intrepid analyst, and they are bound and determined to get a hold of this meeting and take it somewhere crazy. So how do we deal with those kinds of situations? How do you bring the room back when somebody's riding a crazy train to Newark?
Why did it have to be Newark, man?
Whatever came out of my mouth. That was as good as any other town. To Columbus. Crazy train to Columbus. There's more rail on the East Coast. Riding the Acela to Boston.
I want to come up with like an actual martial arts move name for this, but you just have to diffuse them as quickly as you can. And I think I've been that person in my early hotshot, annoying, I want to punch myself in the face days. And I've definitely witnessed that person. And, as soon as they start poking all the holes, you want to say, what I would say is, take a closer look at that. Why don't we table this for a conversation? We can, we could take this outside. Not that I would, I wouldn't phrase it like that. But let's talk about, that's a great question, but I think it might take us off topic for this meeting. Like just thinking of ways to diffuse that sort of energy and really keep the meeting on track for the people that aren't trying to take you down slowly.
As the person who's playing that role for this entire episode, I will, two things. One, if it's people you've met with before, you know who that person is beforehand, and you've got to actually meet with them. You need to present to them one-on-one. Like that tends to be the person who just wants to kind of puff their chest. Like they need to be shown as being partners in it. So whenever possible, when I know there's the person who is going to just totally derail it, is I actually try to bring them in ahead of time, right? It's another thing that takes time. That's becoming a theme here. But sit down with them. I'd love to get your thoughts before I go into the meeting. You're saying before I go in and you completely torch my meeting and won't shut the hell up, why don't we talk about this so that then I can lob them credit. I met with Joe beforehand and we kind of discussed this and this is what we came up with. And then once they get some credit, they often will, shut up. The other, they've got your back. And the other thing is, I think it's to what Lea started off with. When you walk in and you're meek and timid, it's just kind of an opening for the people who are trying to get visibility and who are maybe career oriented. And I definitely will say that it's a hot button. I never think of this as like a career furthering thing, but that's a subject for another episode. I think it's the people who say, oh, I'm in a big meeting. I need to show that I'm smart. I need to chime in. And part of the way I can do that is make the analyst look stupid. And the more that you've got confidence and polish and assertiveness, and the harder it's going to be for them to do that.
Yeah, those are great tips. I also find sometimes an audible growl. No, I'm just kidding.
I have a particular mother joke that works every time. There's an old school sales trick called feel, felt, found. And it's one of my most favorite things to use when I have someone who's trying to hijack a meeting. And it's this really silly trick.
You're touching them?
So what you do is you gently, ever so gently. No, I'm kidding. So feel, felt, found works like this. It's a sentence structure. So you acknowledge how they're feeling. You say other people have felt the same way. And then you say, and when they felt that way, they found something. So you co-opt the statement, and then you turn the statement around to basically say whatever the hell you're going to say in the first place. And it works really well. So, Tim, I understand that you feel that dashboards should only have one page. But speaking with several of my colleagues in XYZ company who have been very successful, they found that doing this like this led to blah.
Oh, and that would have been a great example. He said, you couldn't close it, could you? Because it just falls down and crumbles under its own weight.
I don't want to embarrass you in front of your friends.
All right. So
Too late.
I think these are really great tips. And actually, as we're running short on time, we should do some wrap up and talk about some takeaways.
I will jump in and say that preparation and time, that is probably the toughest thing, because we're working up to the last minute to try to do the best thing possible. Our tendency is to just get slice the data as many possible ways and kind of crunch the data up to the last second. And I think a lot of what has come out in this discussion is there's a real harm to that, because you may have crunched the data the 102nd way, but you actually didn't have the composure and the prep and the confidence and the articulateness going into it to actually deliver it effectively. So doing a little bit less of analysis, and something we didn't touch on, being prepared to follow up. If somebody says, what about this? What about the 102nd way you could have sliced it that you didn't? To be prepared to say, I'm presenting. I'm not throwing this over the wall and I'm done. I'm presenting. I want to have a dialogue. I'm sharing this stuff with you that you guys may have good ideas too. Mentally, you're saying this. I'm prepared to do a follow-up and come back and present more or send out more. But putting the time in to rehearse out loud, rehearse in front of a mirror, organize your thoughts, put the agenda that says, oh, this is really high impact. Think through all of that seems to be something that the daily structure of an analyst world is not conducive to that, but it's super, super powerful when we find the time to do it.
So I got to tell you, I was a little bit concerned about the structure of this one. Because I thought it was going to be kind of a strong emphasis, frankly, on things I'm not very good at.
Why would we do something different with episode?
That's a pretty broad category, Jim. It's broad.
Ouch. It's time for that mother joke. Here it comes. You ready?
Okay.
No, but and again, both of you guys, if anybody's seen Tim's current presentation and Leah's, I mean, that's a pretty tough brass ring to swing for when you're sitting all day trying to do things with Excel. And I liked how today's conversation started to move into some tactical, communication isn't just rocking a room with 600 people in it. Communication is having a good agenda. Communication is following up. Communication is thinking about the legibility of the work that you busted your ass to put together. So I kind of liked how some of that stuff came together. And again, I know I'm dwelling on the agenda thing. Maybe it's just something that's been pissing me off lately. But that's just such a key thing that's really easy that people don't take advantage of. So I liked how this rolled out today. It was fun.
Yeah, and I mean, I second that. What I'm trying to do is, even though for me I love the fancy slides and the big giant audience room, that's not what the majority of the practitioners in this community are facing. And I am trying to empower them to feel like they can take on something like that, but apply it towards a much smaller audience. And it does start with well before the presentation, when you're sending a meeting with a title that actually makes people want to go to that meeting and find out what's going to happen. It's going in there and being prepared to walk through their information in a succinct fashion, but also enable a dialogue. So you guys brought that up, how important that is. And also the other thing is I want to add is ending really strong. You know, what do you want them to do at the end of that? Do you want them to approve a new test plan? Do you want more funding for a campaign? Give them something they should think about doing rather than just, okay, that's it for now. See you in 3 months.
And use McKinsey titles on your slides, right?
McKinsey titles.
How did you not get the McKinsey titles? In?
Oops.
We can't do every tip in this show.
I have to leave a way to come back. So.
And actually, that's one of my big takeaways is I think we covered some really great topics. You know, the concept of thinking through, hey, what do I need this meeting to be about? And actually putting a good agenda or an objective in the meeting invite. I tend to get really sloppy with that. So that's great. I'm going to fix that. Tim, I will reconsider what I think about tables and their usefulness and whether they could be theoretically. While I'm not a data visualization guru, I'm certainly a student of the game, and I'll think about that a little bit. I'll review the research. Not saying I'm converted, just saying I'm willing to learn. And then I think the other thing that is a big takeaway is that there's a lot more to take away on Lea's website. Woo-hoo. So if you go to leapica.com, you can actually find a lot more information about the work that she does and how it can help your organization or help you. And she's also on Twitter at Lea Pica and on the Measure Slack. So again, I agree with what you said as well, Jim. It wasn't immediately clear, how this show would kind of work itself out, but I really like how it did. And I feel like we've just scratched the surface and there's a lot more really exciting things for people to learn. And Lea, I think you're also getting ready to start a podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
I would love to, Michael.
Smooth transition.
So I'm launching the Present Beyond Measure show. You can subscribe on iTunes. I'll have a page on my website. And basically, it's a show that's going to sit at the intersection between data visualization, presentation, and analytics. Exactly the stuff that we're talking about today. But it's really designed to empower anyone at any level in our community to feel like they can deliver a data presentation, an email, a phone call, a WebEx, and really leave a huge mark on their team and move forward in the way that they want. In inside meetings, external industry meetings, it's going to cover all of that. So I'm really so excited to get it off the ground.
Last point for me, if you're listening to this podcast and you like it, we want some more love on iTunes. So if you like the podcast, go to iTunes, give us some positive comments, and I will DM you on Twitter the mother joke that will win a meeting. That is my trade to you.
That's the secret tip available to anyone who rates us on iTunes. That's great. Well, and again, if you've liked what you heard or you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you on our Facebook page, which is Facebook/Analytics Hour, or on Twitter at Analytics Hour, and also on the Measure Slack group, which I believe we have update on the way to get into that if you're not already in it on our Facebook page as well. Thanks again, Lea, for joining us. We're excited about the launch of your new podcast. I think just the short discussion we've had on this show has shown us that it's probably going to be a phenomenal podcast. We can't wait to listen. And for my co-hosts, Tim Wilson and Jim Kane, this is the Analytics Power Hour, signing off.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter. We welcome your comments and questions. Facebook.com/Analytics Hour or at Analytics Hour on Twitter.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
Yeah, I'm still here. Are we ready?
You ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
I'm going to make love to the mic.
I can't do it.
Wow.
We put the tick in analytics.
I put the anal in analytics.
We put the P in API.
I've been called the Bob Ross of analytics.
Oh, man.
I'm on my third bourbon. It's 6 a.m. usually.
That's right.
Yeah, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Okay, fine, I'll go.
You really want to nail the high kick.
Yeah, you don't want to flub the Padishah. I agree. But,
Oh, crap. Now I gotta go to Google. The what?
Is that from Cats?
Meow.
This dashboard has a real Corinthian leather.
I'm not ready anymore.
Editing is really great. That's the best thing about this show.